I'm so happy you're joining me today for our identity series. We have finished the first 3 chapters of Ephesians, and now we're going to begin to unfold the last 3. If you've been with me these past weeks, you know that the first 3 chapters deal with who we are. Now these last 3 chapters will deal with how we live because of who we are. You're familiar with that phrase, walking in the Spirit? Well, that's basically where we're headed in these next chapters. Look at verse 1 in chapter 4. Let me read it for you. Paul says, "As a prisoner for the Lord then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received." That word calling refers to the identity of these Ephesians, their new identity in Christ. And it was a word, by the way, coined in the early days of the church to denote followers of Jesus. Because remember, their movement back then was not called Christianity. It was called the Way. And members of the Way were called little Christs, which is our calling, to be little Christs or to be like Christ. And the easiest way to make that happen is to simply live out our identity, to walk out who we are. For example, on one occasion, Jesus said, "We are the salt of the earth." Do you remember reading that? Now, salt, as you know, seasons, it flavors, it even tenderizes, right? So part of our calling is to make our world more savory and flavorful. It would be like this. If you've ever walked into your house, and I'm sure you have, and smelled a favorite meal in a crock pot or in the oven, and because it's been seasoned and flavored just right, it emits this sumptuous aroma, just the kind of aroma that just wafts through the house, right? Not long ago, I stayed up and watched a movie after Nancy had gone to sleep. And of course, I snacked a little while as I was watching. And I was back on the other end of the house in my office, so I could turn the movie up loud and enjoy myself and enjoy my snacks. Well, the next morning, I grabbed the T-shirt I had on the night before, and Nancy walked up to me for our morning hug and our nunya. Anyway, we're going to have our hug, and right in the middle of it, she backed up and said, "Hailey," and I know I'm about to be in trouble when she calls me Hailey. She said, "Hailey, did you order pizza after I went to sleep last night?" And I'm like, "What?" And I've got this deeply offended look on my face, right? I said, "What? No, I just had a bowl of broccoli and a glass of water." "Seriously, Hailey, smell your shirt." Well, I smelled my shirt. It smelled just like pepperoni pizza. Busted, right? But listen, in a sense, that's our calling. Only it is to be the fragrance of Jesus that lives out of us and into whomever passes through our lives. Because our identity is we are Christians. We are like Christ. So in these first 3 verses here, Paul gives a few reminders of what walking like Christ looks like. So first of all, let's look at what he says here. He says walking like Christ, like Jesus, involves humility. Write that word down. "As a prisoner of the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle." Now, it's interesting to me that Paul only refers to himself here as a prisoner for the Lord. Remember, he was in a Roman prison when he wrote this. Well, but he could have reminded his readers that didn't define him. He could have reminded his readers that he was also Paul the aristocrat from a celebrated family, Paul the chief Pharisee, Paul the learned one, or Paul the famous missionary. But he did not. He would just humbly call himself a prisoner for the Lord. So Paul wasn't just preaching something he only knew about. He was preaching something that he lived. This is who he was. So let's ask and answer a couple of questions right here to help us determine how well we're doing with this idea, this virtue of humility. And the first question is this: are you willing to be honest about your needs? Because humble people are. Now watch this. What we do at times is come to God or just go about living our lives, refusing to really be completely honest. We don't admit and deal with our fears. with our questions, with our struggles, certainly with our shortcomings. In other words, we live in denial. Oh, I'm okay. My life is fine. I can handle it. Nope, don't need a thing, but thank you so much for asking. That sort of a deal. Consequently, we see home after home and relationship after relationship, for example, that are self-destructing and imploding and coming apart at the seams. Why? Because parents and spouses are too prideful to admit, we have some issues here, we need some help. Here's humility. Humility is taking a look at my life and rejoicing where things are good and reaching out to help, for help when they are not. Then a second question. Are you willing to be honest about your faults? You see, a person who lacks humility is always quick to point out the faults of others. Have you noticed that? But unfortunately, they conveniently overlook their own inadequacies. I mean, they can spot the speck in your eye, yet overlook the beam in their own eye. They have this overinflated view of themselves. You're probably familiar with that, right? Several years ago, I told our church this story, but several years ago I was in a boxing class, and it was one of these things where they had punching bags all the way around a big boxing ring. And we would go through all kinds of exercises and drills on the punching bags. Well, one night, there were mostly young people and some older ladies. And I was right next to or in the middle of those older ladies. So we got to punching the bag, and I'm telling you, I got to punching and snorting and sweating and popping that bag. And those ladies around me, they were working hard, but they weren't making quite the noise I was making, you know. And I thought to myself, well, that's right. You still got it, Hailey. You still got it. You're the man. You're the man. One night, about 2 weeks later, this younger man showed up who turned out to be a real boxer in training. Man, biggest mistake I made was getting right next to him to work out, because wow, was he all that. And I'm pretty sure those ladies were laughing at me behind my back now. In other words, it's all about perspective, isn't it? When I was the only guy there, I had this overinflated view of my skills. When I was next to the real deal boxer, I saw the truth. Now again, here's humility. Humility is being willing to honestly evaluate my life and then allow God to make corrections where necessary. So Paul uses the word humility. He mentions a second word in verse 2, gentleness. Paul said, be completely humble and gentle. Now this is the same word that's found in Matthew 5 when Jesus said, blessed are the meek. Meekness or gentleness is the same thing. And by the way, that word does not mean weakness. It actually means strength under control. And here's how you determine if that's true for you. Ask yourself a question. Do I consistently display meekness and gentleness toward other people? Or is it just a once in a while deal? In the Bible, meekness is used as a verb to describe a proud stallion that had been broken to follow the directions of the rider. It's the same word Paul uses here for gentleness, implying that we are to be people who can be directed, ones who can be taught something. Now, does that sound like you? Do you have a teachable spirit? How's your self-discipline? Think about what happens when you're treated harshly or unfairly by others, when you're ignored by your friends or treated disrespectfully by your family or coworkers. How do you react and respond to those things? Because it's not so much about when you're patted on the back as it is when you're stabbed in the back, right? Then what's up? And your answers here will give you some terrific indicators as to whether your life is out of balance with your identity as a Christian. And by the way, this humility and gentleness thing is not about saying, okay, I didn't do very well today, so tomorrow I'm going to try real hard to be humble and real hard to be gentle. No, that's not what it's about. It's about saying, wow, God, something very ugly has been exposed in me today that I didn't even realize was there. And I want you to know, God, I don't like it a bit. Will you teach me how to so rest and trust in you that this pride and anger doesn't have to control me, that I can live a consistent life of gentleness and humility. And then every morning before you walk out of your house, why not speak Galatians 2:23 right over your life, where Paul said, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, and the life I now live, I live by the faith of the Son of God who is in me. I promise you that will be a game changer for you. So walking like Jesus involves humility and gentleness. Third, it involves patience. Verse 2 says, be completely humble and gentle, and then be patient, bearing with one another in love. That word patience is the word makrothumia in the Greek, in case you're interested. And it actually means not easily risen to anger. It's often translated as long-suffering or long-fused, hopefully like your firecrackers had last week. And in the practical sense, it means one who's slow to retaliate or not even retaliate at all. Also, this is a word used exclusively in the New Testament as referring to patience with people, not circumstances, which is why the virtue is really so needed for us. Because many of the problems we deal with involve people who don't always live up to our expectations. Would you agree? Sometimes people let us down. They irritate us. They rub us the wrong way. They can wound us. They can create walls and barriers. Or they can just be stupid. And everyone knows you can't fix what? Exactly. So how many know we need this virtue desperately? And get this. In the ancient world, this word makrothumia was used of a person who was wronged and who not only refused to retaliate, but refused to give up on that one who committed the offense against them. Now listen to this. Even when that offense was committed over and over and over again. So now, with that definition in mind, now how are you doing with patience? Got a handle on it? Or does it pretty well handle you? Did you ever see a big dog and a little puppy playing together? And the puppy will yip and yap and nip and bite and annoy that old big dog, right? And all the time the big dog has his power to destroy that little one with a single chomp, but doesn't do it. That's patience. It's like the story President Reagan used to tell. He loved to tell the story of a lady who knocked on a neighbor's door and asked, do you own a black pit bull dog? And he answered, yes, I do. She said, well, I have to tell you some bad news. Your dog is dead. Now, dumbfounded, the man responded, what do you mean it's dead? What happened? And the lady said, well, my little Pekingese dog killed it. He said, your Pekingese killed it? How did your Pekingese kill my pit bulldog? And she responded, it got stuck in its throat. I know, not quite as funny as I wanted it to be, and kind of gross, I get that. But here's the, but the truth is, patience and long-suffering will never get another caught in its throat. Listen, never forget, that person that pushes your buttons, that one that you are so impatient with, they're on a journey just like you are. And the road they travel may look nothing like your road. Their road may have way more bumps and way more potholes and way more hazards. Therefore, your patience with them may be the very, think about this, your patience with them may be the very thing that encourages them past those obstacles and gives them hope. So, humility, gentleness, patience, and last of all, Paul mentions the word love. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Just before he left the earth, Jesus said to his disciples, it is by this that all men will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. He didn't say people will know you are my disciple if you say the right things. And if you do the right things. He didn't even say people will know you, follow me if you have the correct doctrine. But he said people will know you follow me if you have love for others. You see, love for others is the clearest, most defining characteristic, the identifying mark, if you will, of a child of God. But here's the catch. The catch is that this business of loving others is not always an easy thing to do, right? That's why we often grow impatient. Think about it. It's not terribly difficult to be correct in our doctrine, or to be active in our service, or to use our spiritual gifts, or even to give our resources. But to love that one that bugs me, to love that one and esteem that one and honor that person who doesn't like me or disrespect me or who always disagrees with me, to pursue what's best for that individual who's full of himself, irascible, who's clueless, who's out to lunch or off the wall, that's hard. So what do? What Jesus would do. Love them all the more. And it is possible because God, who is love, lives in us and is just waiting to love others through us. And listen, when we let that happen, that love, guess what, will radically transform even the most unlovely of human beings. The story goes that along the road there was a piece of iron. And one day there came an axe who said to the iron, I think I'll make something out of that piece of iron. And then along came a saw and said, I think I'll make something out of that piece of iron. And then along came a hammer and said, you know what, I'll make something out of that piece of iron. Well, the hammer tried first. It came up and down with full force upon that piece of iron until the head of the hammer flew off, and the piece of iron, of course, remained intact. Then the saw said, hey, watch me. And it came down with a mighty sweep, but simply bent the teeth of that saw, and the piece of iron remained unchanged. Well, the axe said, hey, let me have a try. And the axe came down with a mighty blow, and it dented the blade of the axe. But the piece of the iron remained unfazed. And then came a little flame of fire, a little flicker of fire, who said, I'll make something of that piece of iron. Ha! What can you make? Asked the others. And the little flame came and simply wrapped itself around that piece of iron and stayed there. And stayed there. And stayed there. And didn't let go. And after a while, that piece of iron became red and molten and moldable. And its shape began to change. And it became something more beautiful and completely different than it was before. Now listen. The God who is wrapping Himself around us and making us who we are has entrusted us with the responsibility of wrapping ourselves around the people that He has put in our lives as He molds them into what they were destined to become. That's our calling. And your love is the ingredient, the catalyst that transforms broken people and helps their lives to come back together. Say this out loud. It's not just about me. Say it. It's not just about me. Listen, because this series is called Identity, let me give you the bottom line. This is who you are, really. Are you ready? You are like Christ or a little Christ, His body. You are His hands and feet, and often His mouthpiece in this world. And like these Ephesians, you are the way, pointing others to the way, humbly, gently, patiently, loving the ones God puts in your life. On a wall near the main entrance to the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, is a portrait with the following inscription. Listen to this. If you've never seen it, listen to this. James Butler Bonham. No picture of him exists. This portrait is of his nephew, Major James Bonham, deceased, who greatly resembled his uncle. It is placed here by the family that people may know the appearance of the man who died here for freedom. Hey, No literal portrait of Jesus exists either. But here's the deal. His likeness is all over each and every one of His followers. That means you and I may be the only glimpse of Jesus someone sees all this week long. Remember that, will you? Remember that as you work, as you play, as you do life this week, because someone may be very grateful that you did. I'll stop right there. That's all for today. Thank you again for joining me. Share this on your timeline. If you have any questions or prayer needs, contact me by email on our website or any of the social media venues. And I hope you have a blessed week being like Christ to even those who are hard and difficult in your life. We'll see you soon. God bless you. Bye-bye.